Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Matthew Hirschfeld, and I serve as the Chief Financial Officer for HAL. Before we begin, we request that everyone please stay seated until the event is over, and please stay off your laptops. We will end promptly at 1:20 so everyone can make it to class. We are very honored to be joined by Mr. Friedman for today's fireside chat. Josh Friedman is co-founder, co-chairman, co-CEO of Canyon Partners, a multi-strategy alternative asset manager with $28 billion in assets under management. For over 35 years, Canyon Partners has employed a deep value credit-intensive approach to corporate situations, structured credit, and direct real estate lending and investment. Mr. Friedman is a graduate of Harvard College, Oxford University as a Marshall Scholar, Harvard Business School, and Harvard Law School. He's also a recipient of Institutional Investors Lifetime Achievement Award and serves on the board of Harvard Management Company, the Lincoln Center for Performing Arts, and the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, among others. He's also an owner of multiple sports teams, including the Las Vegas Raiders and Charlton Athletics in the UK.
Small owner of the Raiders, but a big owner of Charlton Athletics.
We are very, very grateful to be hosting him for a conversation on his career and leadership. We will have the conversation moderated by HAL's Chief of Staff, Bobby Peterson, and Co-President Derek Wu. Please join me in welcoming
Thank you, Matt, for that great introduction, and thank you all for joining us here today. We're really grateful to have Josh here on campus for this fireside chat. Just by way of an overview, we'll start off with a few questions about Josh's time at Harvard, his early career, then we'll move to his founding and expansion of Canyon Partners, and we'll close out with some questions about any advice he might have for those interested in investing and growing. And of course, we'll leave some time at the end for student Q&A from the crowd. But Josh, to get things started, the room today is a mix of JD and MBA students, and you did both through the JD MBA program, winning both the Sears Prize as well as being awarded a Baker Scholar Award. Can you walk us through your rationale for doing the joint degree program?
It wasn't really that complicated. My dad, who was not college educated, from the time I was young, we grew up about 15 miles west of here in a town called Wayland. My dad said, because I was really good in school, he said, you have to go to Harvard, and you have to go to Harvard Law School, and you have to go to business school, Harvard Business School. That's what my cousin Eli did. He was the only successful one in the whole family. You'll notice there's an Eli Goldston professor at the law school and at the business school and at the college. That was my dad's third cousin or something. And my dad said, and when you're done, you have to have your own business. Don't work for people. Actually, he used an expletive. Don't work for, because he didn't like the people he worked for. So, but he said, don't be a lawyer. If you do it, don't do it for more than a couple of years. You have to have your own business, have to have your own business. And that was the thinking of a guy who was really smart, not really well educated per se. His dad had died when he was about 13 years old, and they were dirt poor, and clawed his way into a middle class living. And my mother was a school teacher. He ended up being as I said, a non-accredited engineer at a company called Raytheon, which still exists. But he grew up in the Depression. So he was obsessed with financial security, and that was my dad's simple formula to financial security.
That's great. Well, Josh, now we want to zoom into your time here. When you're going back and forth between HLS and HBS, you studied physics in undergrad, you knew you didn't want to be a lawyer, and so naturally you end up at Goldman Sachs. But how did you end up there, I guess? What were you thinking when you were in our shoes about career paths out of graduate school?
So what I was thinking was that I would have my own company and I would work at a startup, which I guess is what everybody does today. And I thought I would start up something techy out on Route 128. There were all these electronics companies. I knew a lot about that stuff. I had done nothing but physics and electrical engineering undergrad, and that was my plan. And I really wanted to have my own business. I didn't really want to work for other people. My dad, and I'd ask my dad, why should I have my own business? He'd say, because you're short and you're Jewish, and people are very prejudiced against both around here. So you don't want to do that. You want to have your own business, then you don't have to answer to anybody. That was my dad's, again, his simple logic. It turned out to be great. Yeah. It turned out to be kind of a great bit of logic, but I got waylaid because here I was in my JD MBA program, and I had a bunch of summer jobs. And of course, I was a really good student. What was all the competition for? It was go work for Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs or whatever. Investment banking was the thing. So I figured, well, I'm really young. I was a couple of years young for my grades, so I figured maybe I'll do that for a couple of years, and then I'll figure out how to do my own thing after that. And I had no idea what Goldman Sachs really was. I don't think my dad, who was giving me all this great career advice, had a clue what Wall Street was. Private equity really didn't exist. There were 36 firms back then, maybe. So it was just starting.
Yeah.
But I did that because I thought it would be a great way to kind of credentialize myself. I would learn, and by the way, I also thought law would be really good to learn. HBS would be fantastic because I'd get 10 years of experience in two, which I think proved to be the case, and then some. So,
Can we just ask, how did you manage to be a Baker Scholar and win the Sears Prize? That's, I mean, surely you were doing enough. That's enough reading, but oh my gosh.
I was a good. If I picked a career according to what I was really, really best at, it would be at taking exams. I'm really first class at taking exams of all sorts. I was good at physics exams, and let me tell you, the guys, you want to see smart people? There's a lot of really smart people at Harvard Law School. They're not also crafty about how to take an exam. The guys in physics are off the charts. But they were at that era. This was, when I graduated undergrad, were 76. The guys who went on to become the greatest physicists of our era they didn't study. They just were there. I'm doing the even numbered problems. I'm doing the odd ones because that's the even number one's the problem set. I'm doing the odd number one just in case because that might be the exam. And so I was ready. They weren't ready. They were just way smarter. But I knew how to take exams. So that's how I did that. That was what I was good at.
That's remarkable. Awesome.
And I liked it. It was like solving puzzles. It was like doing the New York Times crossword puzzle.
So Josh, in 1984, you joined Drexel, you left Goldman. We have two questions for you on this. First, how did you establish the conviction to leave such a storied firm like Goldman to build this new line of business? And second, while you were at Drexel, what was it like building out this new product alongside, the rise of the private equity titans we know about today?
So I was a second-year associate at Goldman. My roommate from law school and business school was a guy named Mitch Julis. We eventually started our firm together. Mitch had been a bankruptcy lawyer, and he hated practicing law. So he quit, and he ends up doing bankruptcy investing at Drexel on the West Coast, which is a sort of generally regarded as being kind of a third-rate firm. I'm sitting here going, I don't really want to work for any of these firms, so I was keeping track of who all the real financial entrepreneurs were out there. Who's going out and buying companies and selling companies and building private equity businesses, not with a fund per se, but just building things. The Daryl Ruttenbergs and Andre Mayers of the world, early stage, the West Rays of the world. And I knew all about this guy, Mike Milken. So Mitch goes out there because he was writing an article about investing after he quit Wachtell Lipton. He had no idea what he was going to do. And he wrote an article about investing in a recession. And one of his strategies was buy junk bonds. He flies out, interviews these guys. And they say, wow, we don't have guys who went to Princeton and Harvard Law School, Harvard Business School. Why don't we interview you instead of you interviewing us? And basically he became the bankruptcy analyst. And then he heard that Mike had this plan of going out to use high yield bonds to finance leverage buyouts, which had never been done. And he needed somebody kind of to run that area. And Mitch said, oh, you should call my roommate Josh. So I left being a second-year associate at Goldman. I became a partner at Drexel. And I think the guys at Goldman almost none of them had even heard of Drexel. A year later they had, because every single deal was a Milken-led Drexel deal. You'd look at the Wall Street Journal. We were involved in 90% of the stuff of the acquisitions going on. Every hostile deal, every buyout. I mean, the market share was tremendous. And because I was running capital markets, that was what I did. I was in charge of this area, and I'm like, we didn't know what we were doing. We had no idea. We were making it up. But the market would tell us, and that's what Mike Milken was doing. It was pretty brilliant what he did.
So is your advice there to students who, a lot of folks are graduating and going to cushy firms, whether in law or, business, is the advice to keep your ear to the ground and read where others, try to go where others might not, because this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Most people would probably have stayed at Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, most would have. I was probably partially ignorant of how good an opportunity it would have been to stay at Goldman Sachs. I'd been hired by Steve Friedman, who was running the firm 2 years later, and I was sort of his guy. Mm-hmm. So I was on the fast track there, but I didn't really want to be at any of those firms. I wanted to have my own business. And Mike Milken, I knew, was running, when he was running the high yield group at Drexel, it was essentially a hedge fund. It was in the early days a $2 billion hedge fund with all the capital provided by the firm and a 35% promote.
Wow. Okay.
Pretty good. And so after all expenses. So it was even like Citadel, and the expenses all passed through.
Yeah.
So that was kind of what it was. And Mike's, and I figured, okay, Mike is giving money to all these incredible financial entrepreneurs and these guys running these LBO firms. There weren't that many back then. It was KKR, Clayton Dubilier, Wes Ray, Gibbons Green, Van Amerongen, the predecessor to Leonard Green, Adler and Shaken, a few others. And Mike's idea was let's use our capital to just offer them our capital instead of having them go to these insurance companies. And let's invest in these deals. And in the early days of the buyouts, the deals were fantastic. Multiples were low. The buyout firms would approach a divisional manager at a part of a conglomerate, and they'd buy that division. The CEO of that division would quickly realize that he's more aligned with the buyer than the seller. Mm-hmm. And so they're trying to make the price low, not high. You can't do any of that anymore, but and the competition is ferocious today. But that was the business back then. And I just figured, if I want to have my own business, if I want to run my own business, if I really want to be on my own, here's a firm that is running around financing people who are entrepreneurial, who want to buy companies, who don't have any money. This is a much better thing to do than to become a very high-priced auctioneer of companies, which is what I was doing in the merger department at Goldman Sachs. Yeah. We were good at it. It was pioneering. It was, they were fantastic mentors, but here was a different kind of mentor in a much less controlled way.
Great. So why don't we move next to talking about leadership and building Canyon. So in 1990, you started Canyon Partners with your HLS roommate, actually, Mitchell Julius. Julius, yes. Bobby and I actually happen to be roommates, so fun fact.
Oh, there you go.
I don't think we'll start anything close to Canyon, but maybe something. So first, we'd just love to hear maybe a memorable anecdote from your time in Harvard Square.
So some people plan their lives, and sometimes you were saying you just have to keep your antenna up so that when the opportunity that suits you is there, you take a shot at it. If it's not working, you can pivot, right? Today people pivot like crazy. Well, Mitch wanted to be an entertainment lawyer. Yeah. We weren't interested in credit and bankruptcy and this and that. And he went for an interview with some Beverly Hills law firm, and he figured it must be an entertainment firm. There's nobody else on the interview schedule. Yeah. And they talk to him, and they go, so why are you interested in us? He starts talking about the movies and this, and he had like memorized every movie that had ever been made. He has an encyclopedic knowledge of entertainment, and still does. And he goes on and on and on, and they go, well, that's great, but we're actually a bankruptcy law firm. And so he's like, oh, forget it. That's not what I'm interested in at all. And they go, no, we're doing Jerry Lewis' bankruptcy. Well, Mitch is a Jerry Lewis fanatic because he had gone bankrupt, and he wanted to get out of his contracts. We use it to get out of all the executory contracts. Yeah. And so then, and they said, and we're doing Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. He signed a 6-album deal with Universal. The first album took off. He doesn't want to deliver the next 5 albums, so he's trying to get out of it by using bankruptcy. And so Mitch says, okay, I'll try it. And he does it for the summer, and he ends up loving bankruptcy stuff. And he was always an investor. Yeah. I couldn't figure out why he wanted to be a lawyer in the first place, because he always loved investing. We did some investing back when we were in graduate school. We were taking our student loans and putting in the Fidelity money market account, earning 14% while we weren't paying interest yet. That was pretty good until you had to pay it for the tuition. We're trying to figure out, I hope this Fidelity company isn't going to lose our money. It was a money market fund. The rates were crazy in '82. It was the Volcker era. So anyway, that's how the whole thing got started. And then Mitch starts doing credit stuff, becomes a bankruptcy lawyer, starts trading bankruptcy, and that leads to, before you know it, we're both on the credit side of the equation. So it was really not intended, but that's one of many.
And just a final follow-up on the entrepreneurial path. You mentioned that since you were a young child, your father was pushing you to start your own business. Now you're at Drexel. Do you think if Drexel hadn't run into the issues that it had at that time, you and Mitch would have done something different? Like, would you guys have started Canyon in the same way?
No, probably not. But I was at a very young age in a truly unique position, in a truly unique part of Drexel. You had this big firm, and there was one department driving it, and it was the high yield department. It was well capitalized. It was creative. It was actually a hedge fund inside of a firm. That's what it was. And I was like one of the most senior guys in that fund. So that was a great place to be. So I probably wouldn't have left if it had kept on that trajectory, or at least left so soon. I was there 5 years, a very influential 5 years, with unbelievable mentors in the form of Mike Milken and a guy named Peter Ackerman, who passed away. I was a great guy. And brilliant guy, PhD from the Fletcher School, really smart guy. But no, I probably wouldn't have left at that point. But I probably would have left eventually. And I probably would have ended up on the private equity side as opposed to the credit side of the world.
So Josh, something that we found incredible was that you founded Canyon Partners only 8 years after graduating from Harvard. Can you speak to the difficulty of getting this firm off the ground, whether it's raising capital or building out a team?
Well, there's all these other people today founding firms like before they finish school and they quit. So 8 years maybe that's a long time, and I spent a long time in school too. So maybe it wasn't quite so dramatically young. We didn't have a particularly brilliant business plan when we started. We had another partner. Actually, we had a couple other partners, but they eventually all went away. They didn't either have the discipline or the interest in sticking with it while we figured out what we were doing. We didn't really know how to raise money. George Soros offered to give us $100 million to start a hedge fund, but he wanted basically half the fees. And I didn't want to do that. Maybe that was a bad decision because we could have probably done that for a while and then given him the money back. And it would have gotten us off way faster. We got a couple of people that we knew, an insurance company and a fund of funds and a foreign bank, to give us big managed accounts, like 50 to 100 million each, to go out and buy securities in the aftermath of Drexel blowing up. Now remember, Drexel was the only market maker of any significance in a new asset class of high yield bonds. And you have an economy that's coming out of a recession. You have savings and loan institutions failing left, right, and center because of real estate problems. Many of them own high yield bonds. They're taken over by the government, which is now puking these into the market with no market maker. So we're looking at this stuff, and like the prices are so low you could cry. We know these credits. So we got these managed accounts, and that was great. So we started buying securities, and those things had rates of return like 50, 60% for 3 years. But then you have to give the money back. So now what do? Well, we now got to raise a fund. We had no idea how to do that. So we started with $17 million. 9 of it was ours. So it was, and then eventually we figured out how to raise institutional capital. And slowly. So we were not, it wasn't a big flash in the pan success. We also were doing initially a lot of restructuring advisory work because there were a lot of bankruptcies in the aftermath of Drexel's, or companies that were just in distress. And we were uniquely knowledgeable about how to rejigger these balance sheets because of where we come from. And that was advisory work where you could at least get fees right away while you were trying to figure out where you were going to get somebody to give you money. But we didn't really, I don't think it was nearly as well thought out or as well planned as it could have been had we been maybe a little more exposed to what the industry looked like. We were doing it kind of in a vacuum.
And as you're working through this, obviously you're doing this hand in hand with your partner Mitchell, and people always say that one's co-founder is such an important and pivotal decision. How did you go about thinking and assessing the character of your law school roommate over the years you guys lived together, and eventually when you're starting to think about starting Canyon, that this is the right person who you trust and to build a business with?
Well, we started with more than just Mitchell, so we couldn't get it all right. But Mitch and I both had sort of the same outlook on things. Ethically, we knew what happens when you make a mistake on anything that involves crossing lines or being too aggressive. We didn't want to get anyone near those. We agreed on that. Mitch was really smart, really diligent, a very, very good research guy, particularly in bankruptcy and distressed. So we said, let's just give it a shot. I don't know. We'll figure out which way it goes. Yeah. We didn't really know which of the different things that we were doing were going to really work. And we were doing some private equity initially too, but sort of fundless private equity stuff. But I knew that Mitch was smart and trustworthy, and and hardworking, and those are three really important things.
Yeah, totally.
So you mentioned you started off with about $17 million. You're now at $28 billion under management.
29 and change, but it's okay.
29. Shouldn't short out. How has the original strategy for Canyon changed over the years,
Yeah.
and how have you balanced, the desire for the firm's growth while staying nimble into new asset classes or opportunities?
Well, we're in a really difficult transition right now. So 28 may sound big, but then you look at Apollo at a trillion, or you look at some of these other firms that have just exploded. We never wanted to be just an asset gatherer. We want to be an alpha generator. Like we want to be. So how do you think about your size and what you do? And you have to. We were very blessed because when we started as a small hedge fund trying to make money in ways that we wanted to make money with our money. And it was sort of like, if you build it, they will come. And you charge, 1.5 and 20, and you get a bunch of, eventually as you build up a track record, you start to get an endowment, then you get another one, and a foundation, and a high net worth family, and then you get a sovereign in there, and before you know it, it develops a lot of momentum. That is not the business model today. Almost everybody who started with that business model found that the desire for that type of, free range, but credit oriented hedge fund, because we always stayed credit oriented. It's what we do. We're value guys and we're credit guys. Almost all those firms are gone today. Almost every single one. And most of the multi-strats are gone too. There are different kinds of multi-strats today, more like these pod shops that are very levered. They call them multi-strats, but it's not like in the tradition of our original firm. So at some point, most of those firms have turned into either family offices or they've gone away. So we decided, do we want to do that? Or do we want to transition this to something else? Well, to transition it to something else, you still keep that core product, but you've got to say, what does the market actually want? And how do we do a much better than average job in that business? So maybe that's CLOs, where you're buying bank debt and leveraging it up 10 times, locking it up for 10 years and doing it again and again. Or maybe it's distressed investing, drawdown funds. Maybe it's real estate lending. Maybe it's structured products, originating or buying in the secondary market, distressed mortgage product or whatever, or aircraft leasing paper or things like that. So we basically completely redid the product line. That's really hard because every time you raise a fund that's much more tailored to where investor demand is, you've got to create it, then it becomes the first fund, and that's really hard. And by the time you get the second or the third, it's easy. So that's really hard work. And I think most people in our position would not necessarily have had the stomach to do that.
Yeah.
But we're pretty high energy, and we looked around the room and we have a lot of really, really good people around us. And we said, like, let's try it. And we had to let up the reins a lot. And you hire people who are really great, and then you put them in charge of something. We said, this is what I think works. You do that. But you have to think really carefully every time you do that about what's your competitive advantage versus other people in the marketplace.
Right.
Because if you don't have a competitive advantage, you're not going to be successful with those businesses.
Right. Kind of like the concept of the right to win. Anyway.
Yes, it is that way. You don't just, you're not going to just win because you're smarter or you're this, that. Maybe some people can. You have to think about what other people are doing.
Yeah.
Structurally, what's your advantage?
Yeah. Well, Josh, we also wanted to ask you, you're not only a leader at your firm and within the financial sector, but you're also involved in the Hoover Institution and on the board of the advisory board for the Federal Reserve. So could you talk a little bit about, I guess, just to start, how you manage your time running, a very significant asset manager, but also putting forward your time into helping the country?
I mean, most of these things have a life cycle to them. They have a time when you're really, really busy and a time when you get a little less busy. Yeah. I mean, I've been on the board of Harvard Management, which runs the endowment here, which was kind of a notorious mess when I got there along with a bunch of other directors. And everybody recognized it, including the people running it. They had had 8 CEOs inside of 10 years. Yeah. You can't run any business with 8 CEOs inside 10 years. Sorry, I've had my back to you guys. But it's a little bit like if you own a house and you said, I think I'm going to do an addition on the house and I'm going to hire a Pritzker Prize winning great architect. Then you do another edition, you do 8 editions in 10 years. You look at your house, go, I think this is a teardown. It's a mess. That's what Harvard management was. So there was a huge amount of work on that to fix the culture and almost start over and reinvent it. And we had really great people on the board who were focused on it and understood it and fixed it, but it was difficult. So that had a big effort at the beginning. Los Angeles County Art Museum, we decided to build a new museum at a time when we had $300 million in debt, almost no cash, and it was going to cost $800 million to build a new museum. Well, we did it, but we had to do a lot of things before we decided to knock the old buildings down. And so that was a lot of work. So I like to have these. I also like ones where I learn something that's relevant to my business.
Yeah.
And things like the group of people on that HMC board, or the people involved at the, not so much the Hoover necessarily, that I like because I think it does great work. But if you take something like the Dallas Federal Reserve Board, it's an incredible group of people. And so I learn every time there's a meeting, and it doesn't tax my time that much. You know, it's one day every quarter in town. So I think also there's a phenomenon where if you really get great people working for you and you get them in the right lanes and you motivate them, it does take some pressure off your schedule. But as they say, if you want to get something done, you know, ask a busy person. It usually works better.
So Josh, we'll move to our last category now, which is lessons in investing. So Canyon's made a name for itself in value-oriented and special situations credit investing. Can you walk us through how the research and investment process might differ versus traditional equity investing? And then how was your legal training helpful in this investment strategy?
Oh boy. First of all, we like complex credit situations. Distressed, companies who need capital, but there's something that's non-conforming, things that are high value added, et cetera. Is it different from equity investing? Not always. It's like equity investing with a lot of complexity. If you're buying debt at, if you're buying debt at, is that me or is that you guys?
That's definitely us, not you.
Okay. If you're buying debt of a company at 75 cents on the dollar or 80 cents on the dollar or 20 cents on the dollar, you're not really buying debt. Right? You might be, but I mean, that would be, generally debt is a negative optionality security. And you have to understand optionality because it's like being, as I would say, short a put. Basically, if you're right, you get your money back. If you're wrong, you lose everything. That's not a very attractive way to do things. So we're always trying to find things where we turn it into positive optionality, which is much more like what equities are.
Right.
So there's a lot of equity analysis you really have to do to understand these. The difference is a lot of the best equity ideas are the nexus between valuation and business analysis can be a little tenuous.
Yeah.
Anthropic just raised money to $350 billion valuation. These are companies that have low revenues and massive losses. And we have no idea what the return on equity is on the capital they're investing. But we do know it's existential. Like if they don't invest that money, they're screwed. They won't be around. So they're going to put it out almost irrespective of what the IRR is on it. And all that being said, we made a little investment with our family office in it because we think it's a good chance it's going to trade at twice that.
Yeah.
We don't do that kind of analysis on debt. It's just a different kind of animal. Yeah. And that's not a really great analysis on the equity either, but it bet you it's going to be right. I think that there are some overlaps. When you're buying distressed, the problem is that in the case of credit today, if you get toward the zone of actual distress and you need a maturity extension, you need a restructuring, their company is not going to be able to pay its obligations when due. That's when that legal stuff really helps. And on the way over here, I was on with Mitch and one of our partners who was a Harvard Law School guy who was a Roberts clerk and won the Sears Prize. He's fantastic, brilliant guy. And we're talking about what ways can we get screwed in this situation because restructurings have become really, really dangerous, like really dangerous. When I was at Harvard Law School, they used to teach you that every contract has an implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. I don't think that exists any longer.
Right.
I think it just doesn't exist in contracts because people go out of their way to figure out how am I going to do something. How's the sponsor goes out of their way to figure out how am I going to go do something to really screw the creditors so that I can get another shot here, right?
Yeah.
And the pioneers in that, like Apollo, right, have taught that to everyone. So they're not unique.
Yeah.
Everyone does that. The nicest white shoe guys, they're all doing that. And if they haven't figured it out themselves, Kirkland and Ellis will be happy to show them how to do it. So it's awful. I mean, I don't want to sound prissy, but it's not really very ethical in my view. Yeah. But you have to be a combination of, crafty and have really good legal analysis. We use extensively in deals that we've done. Like we were the largest creditor in the Caesars bankruptcy, and we use a guy who was in my law school class named Bruce Bennett, who is ferocious. He's so good, right. and he's brilliant, and he's good at that game. But I don't like that game. But you need to be able to play that game in order to play in the credit markets today.
Right. So when you're doing these analyses to say where should we invest, given the development of how rough things have gone, are you making an assessment based on which other players are in the capital structure here, or are you thinking there's ways to sort of bulletproof our document? Like how does
sometimes when you're in a situation already and they do an extension, you then immediately do everything you can to bulletproof your document.
Right.
That's exactly correct. If you're looking at certain situations, you go, I know that guy is not going to do me any favors. That guy I can trust. Right. You absolutely have that aspect. Yeah. But at the end of the day, we're all fiduciaries for our LPs. So you sometimes have to do things that are good for you. I don't like the business where I own a security, you own the same security, and we get treated remarkably differently in the same restructuring.
Right.
I don't think that's right. But now you have a lot of that. And if you can't play that game, you better just find another game. A lot of the stuff we do does not involve bankruptcy and distressed, but we have to be really selective where we participate because that kind of stuff is unavoidable today. That was not the case 20 years ago.
Yeah. You mentioned being a fiduciary for your LPs, so I'm very curious. You also talk about often investing through cycle and being disciplined and not rushing into hot markets, which we've seen various firms implode because they've done that. Just wondering, how do you go about balancing that, especially at a time where it seems, from the outside perspective, LPs are really pushing a lot of funds to deploy capital?
Oh, for sure. And it's incredibly enticing if you're a GP because you want to grow the value of your firm. Everybody say goodbye to Oliver, my son. If private credit's an example, I think Highbridge and a bunch of other guys had a brilliant idea. The banks are kind of sitting on their hands. Let's do something that's more aggressive than a bank loan. We'll charge 675 over at the time LIBOR, right. and we'll do it privately, directly, and so forth. This became such a growth engine that, and by the way, the biggest thing it grew was the value of Highbridge, of HPS. Mm-hmm. And the same thing happened with Ares, Apollo, Sixth Street, TPG, everybody. Yeah. Goldman Sachs, they'll raise a private credit fund that's like half the size of our firm. Right. Now, what do you think happens then? There's too much capital chasing too few deals, and the spreads go from 675 to 425. The covenants vaporize, yeah. And the multiple of EBITDA they're financing goes up by 2 turns. And then big surprise, Blue Owl now has a BDC that isn't going to make any more distributions. I mean, that's what happens. So what we try to do in our business is not be just focused on the value of our GP, of our firm. We've been very, very fortunate in life. And it's not like we don't focus on that. Of course we do. Right. And those people earned the right to gather huge assets because they did a great job. Yeah. So you can't completely fault them. But the management fees can serve, as one of my friends said, they can serve as a drug. You've got investors who want their money put to work and they want to earn. So what happens is that becomes a priority, right. And they become asset gathering firms. So for us, the nice thing about that is when you turn into a $1 trillion firm, you're no longer interested in doing things that come in $10 or $15 million lumps and doing that over and over again. You're not interested in the highly complex negotiated, structured products trade. So we try to find places that are still require the skills of a big firm. Right. So we're not going to get the ankle biter guys coming and competing with us, but also that where some of these other firms they've moved on to markets that are just much, much bigger. And that's what we do today to try to seek complexity and competitive advantage. And we don't always get it right, but that is the definition of what we're trying to do as a firm. And that means you got to be a, call it $20 to $50 billion firm with a variety of different products. And then in each one, you have to assess that competitive advantage.
Awesome. Right. And building off that, within Canyon, is there any product or sector that you see particularly interesting for the firm strategy that the larger scale players might not be taking advantage of?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And it's different in real estate. It's different in corporate private credit or whatever, and it's different in asset-backed. But so, for example, in real estate right now, in the commercial side of real estate, the banks have incredible regulations on them now, courtesy of the errors of Silicon Valley Bank and others. And if you look at what happens when interest rates go way up and it exposes that kind of stuff, the regulators respond by giving huge risk-weighted capital assignments on loans in certain sectors, like, say, office. So we've done like 6 deals with JP Morgan. Now, what do they look like? Well, we did one deal where the Koch family put up 40%, built an office building. It's all done. It's in Nashville. And now they're leasing it up. So they want a bridge loan. And if they don't get a bridge loan, they have their own money. They can do it without. But they'd rather get a bridge loan. JP Morgan they're a JP Morgan client. Well, JP Morgan can't make that loan. They'll get 100% risk-weighted capital charge. So they show it to us, and they say to the Kochs, we'll make it, but we're going to make it through Canyon. So we make the loan, they give us back leverage. We earn 15% lending, pretty senior in the capitalization of the Kochs. We just got paid off. Why can we do that? We do that because there's a regulatory problem, number one. And number two, they're never going to show that to one of these big firms that they perceive to be a private credit behemoth competing with them and speaking ill of them constantly in the press. Yeah. Right? So it's not going to. So we do tons of those now. In structured products, there's a different version of that. We did a deal with one of the major regional banks, half a $1 trillion player, where they have thousands and thousands and thousands of clients who have home loans with them. But like most people who have home mortgages, the mortgages are 300, 400 basis points below where mortgages are today. So people are not prepaying those loans. My oldest son has a 2.25% 10-year interest rate, interest-only mortgage with JP Morgan. He's not prepaying that loan. And it's about 30% loan to value. So what does he do if he wants? Well, he's not going to sell his house, because he's going to be able to afford a smaller house, because the mortgage today would be 6 instead of 2. So he takes a second mortgage, and he fixes the house up and fixes the bathrooms and puts a guest house in the back and all that. Now he can borrow from his father, but so can those bank customers. Mm-hmm. It's a different way. Yeah, so it's a little different. So what happens is the bank. So in my case, there's a statutory rate with a family that's like in the high ones. But the rate that happened when I did it was. But the rate from a commercial bank today to those customers. So we'll say, let's define a box that's really easy to lend to. 750 FICO scores. Never missed a payment. Less than 65% loan to value. Really easy one. And they'll make those loans at 7%. They'll give us. We'll turn around and securitize those, and we'll earn 15 to 22% on the junior piece, and get our money back really fast, because if you're used to paying 2 or 3 on your first, you're going to pay back that 7 pretty fast. Yeah. That's what happens. And they don't default. So why does that exist? Well, there's a structural problem. It's pervasive in the banking world. Right. And it's hard for those gigantic firms to invest the time and energy, because it's a lot of work to put not that much money out. Right. Because by the time you securitize and only keep the retained part, if you originate $1 billion of paper over the course of the year, you're only really putting 200 to work. Right. And it's paying back over 3 years, so you only have 150 out the door. Yeah. It's very high yield, but it's not big enough for Apollo to focus on that. Right. What they'll focus on is all those investment grade tranches of that have much lower yield, but are big size and work for an insurance company.
Where they can put the money.
So we'd rather have them be a partner of ours on the senior side, and also the bank doesn't love being partners with someone they perceive to be a direct competitor,
Right.
which is what the private credit firms of big size kind of look like. So today, I would say, you always look for what the reasons are. Markets are pretty efficient and people move quickly. So where are there structural reasons and personal incentive reasons that make something likely to be successful and earn kind of an alpha type of rate of return relative to what you would otherwise be able to earn? If I compare the return on those second mortgages, in the securitizations to what you get in the public markets for the same IRR, there's no comparison in the credit quality.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, let's open it up to questions. We'll get everyone out of here by 1:20, but we'll probably have time for one or two.
Hi, Josh. Thank you for coming today. I had a question about how you think about protection as a credit investor in this new world of distressed debt and LME. So it used to be the case that if you were a credit investor, you protect yourself through priority, maybe priority in collateral, priority in prior payment. Maybe you try to take the inside maturity, maybe structural seniority. All of that, like you said, nowadays can change in the blink of an eye.
It's a great question, and the answer is sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you just can't, and you get a really nasty surprise. But you can. It helps if you are a sort of big enough to be of great importance to the sponsor. You try to make sure you're on the various steering committees or these preferred groups that are going to likely hoover up all the good stuff while they leave everybody else in their wake. It's an ugly game, and you're right. All that part of what you were talking about is really kind of the legal analysis part of it, but that doesn't do you much good if you don't have the right partners and you're not positioned with the right size in the right part of the balance sheet. And you can't just change. When facts change, you say, oh no, this is getting worse. By then you might be restricted because you went to all this work to get yourself into the restricted group, or the market's not liquid enough. So I think it's a tough game. One of the reasons I like asset-backed, like we do a lot of distressed asset-backed also. We were big players in the 2005 to 2018 period, particularly 2012 to 18, when you had all the really distressed stuff being sold by the government and all these mortgage-backed securities. That was fantastic. But what's good about securitizations is you don't go through a bankruptcy. There's sort of an automatic procedure that takes place when something gets offsides. And so it's much more the pure analysis.
Awesome.
If you were starting from scratch today with like a small pool of capital and looking for things that even your types of funds structurally can't touch, where would you be looking?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I wish I had a good answer, but I don't. I never liked the small cap lending business or the small cap business. I never liked small or mid cap business. That's part of the reason why we have this fork in the road. Do we want to graduate into this size where we have enough size and bulk to have the sophistication of a huge firm, but not so big that we have the incentive or the need to become an asset gatherer? And that's kind of our niche. There are people who have done a fantastic job in smaller cap lending. By the way, you still need a lot of money to do it because you need diversification, you need whatever, but the risks inherent in smaller business are much higher. I do think that there's so much capital out there that's available today to partner with, and some businesses don't need as much capital and some need huge amounts of capital. But if I were starting over today, I'd probably do a completely different business anyway. I'd probably be back on my first plan A, which was the startup tech stuff. But I'm too late on that one.
All right, maybe one more.
Yeah, do you have any favorite trades?
Favorite trades? You mean like historically?
Yeah, or that you did or someone else did?
Yeah, I mean, the ones that I love the most are where we're trying to solve a problem for someone, and we can get paid a lot by figuring out a custom solution of how to provide capital. So, for example, and we've had many of these over the years. We do this a lot, and we call them sort of capital solutions trades. They're fun and they're interesting. We did a trade. Fortress as an equity controlled a public company that was a REIT, and they own mortgage servicing rights. Basically, they have long tail mortgage servicing rights. So every time you make your mortgage payment, they take a little slice of it. So it's like an annuity, but it only lasts as long as the mortgage is outstanding. If somebody defaults on the mortgage, they get cut off, or if interest rates go down sufficiently, people refinance their mortgages and it gets cut off. So that's what it's like. They call these IO streams, but they're basically the long duration fee business. They owned all these, they're called MSRs, mortgage servicing rights, and they owned it in a public real estate investment trust. So they were leveraging the hell out of it so they could pay a good dividend on the stock to keep the stock price up. And of course, the global financial, COVID hits. And of course, the world starts falling apart. People are worried, oh my God, can people make their mortgage payments? More importantly, the whole market gets hit. And the person they had borrowed, their borrowing was all like Credit Suisse repo lines, which basically means they're getting their repo lines pulled at exactly the time when you can't sell the mortgage servicing rights. So the stock is cratering. So we go in and say, we'll replace that. We're going to charge you a big interest rate, and we're going to make it. You can't prepay us, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to pay down Credit Suisse. And because we know Credit Suisse, if we pay them down enough, we can get them to sit still. And then everybody will say, all's well, and it'll be great. And our debt will trade up to like 120 or 130. So we propose like 13% non-callable, blah, blah. They hate the interest rate. They hate the non-call. So we have multiple iterations. This is what I like these. They're intellectually interesting. We go, well, how about if we make the rate lower, like say 10 or 11, and you can call it this time, you can call it anytime you want, but we get a bunch of warrants on the stock. And we love that idea because we thought people will still say, oh, the balance sheet's even better now, right? It's lower cost debt. It's completely fixed. It's long term, if they want it to be long term. Once it's fixed, everybody will say, wow, this company has longevity, and the stock will go up, and we'll make our money on the warrants. And we'll make an even higher return because we'll be able to sell the debt or get it refinanced. And that's what we ended up doing. So it's all about trying to solve a problem, usually for a larger or sophisticated sponsor, where we're getting paid excessively because we've solved a problem, not because we've taken excessive risk. I mean, there are ones that, if Mitch were here, he'd be talking about RJR and doing battle with the evil Apollo and TPG and how they were trying to screw us by stealing all the hotels at no price and, all this stuff. And that's fun and interesting too. And it's all more interesting than just pumping out massive amounts of capital, in my opinion.
Love it. Well, Josh, on behalf of all of us here, thank you so much.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you, Bobby. Thank you.